Welcome to our bike riding session. Have any of you been to our ski sessions or any of the other stuff we've done so far? No, awesome. So really, I'll get the rest of it here. The goal of tonight is to kind of present you with some strategies to keep safe on the bike this season. And then try to be as interactive as we can. So we're here to answer any questions, anything that pops up, please feel free to jump in and pick our brains. We've got myself, I'm one of the orthopedic surgeons here at Banff Sport Medicine, and my name's Michaela. We've got Jacob Carter, who's one of our physiotherapists here in-house, and we've got McIsaac, who is one of our sport medicine physicians. So kind of different angles of expertise. And we all bike, some better than others. But yeah, lots of experience behind the wheels as well. Cool. So may as well jump right into it. My goal tonight is pretty brief. It's essentially to scare you enough that you never get on your bike again and never have any injuries. Seriously though, mostly just to reinforce that biking is dangerous. And I think if we understand that, acknowledge that, then we can better prepare for it and thereby minimize the risk to ourselves. So it's also an extremely popular sport. These are recent stats from Stats Canada, and about 30% of Canadians are riding bikes, which is really cool. It tends to be more younger people, and it tapers off as we get older. So like 80% of kids ride bikes under the age of 14, but by the time it's 50, only about a quarter of people are still biking. Males and females, it's actually starting to get a little bit more equal over the years. So those are stats from 2017, I believe this was. City and rural bikes pretty much equivocal. And the one interesting little point there is definitely it seems to be a bit of a higher socioeconomic status activity, which is interesting. Because, you know, obviously mountain biking and fancy road bikes are expensive, but I'd say access to bikes is pretty reasonable now. So I think that's an interesting little stat there. And I wonder if there's ways to change it. Because lots of people are biking, lots of people are getting hurt. So the mean age, this is data that's kind of collected globally through a number of studies that I put together, but the mean age of bikers getting hurt seem to be about 35 years, sort of middle-aged. Definitely more males than females. But again, as there's more female participation, that number is starting to equalize a little bit more. And what I thought was kind of interesting is you're actually more likely to get hurt if you're a better biker than as a beginner, which is so different from most other sports, right? It's the beginners that get hurt off the ski hill, but it's actually more experienced bikers that are hurting themselves because they're riding faster, they're riding more technical trails with more consequences. I've been told multiple times that bike parks are super safe because the features are like perfectly engineered, you're never going to hurt yourself, all wrong. You actually hurt yourself way more in the park than you do on just general trails. And typically it's some sort of fall over the handlebars or the endo as we know it. Yeah. All right. So this is actually data from the Rio de Janeiro Olympics back in, was it 2016, I believe. And BMX biking and mountain biking were the number 1 and 3 most injury-prone sports in the games, as you can see by that bar graph. And not only that, but the most likely to cause kind of career, or not career, sorry, season-ending or game-ending injuries. So people didn't just, you know, tweak a muscle, they broke a bone, and then they were done. So that's interesting. And that first stat there is from a study of Toronto bike commuters, which I did for about 10 years of my life. You're more likely to get hurt in 1 kilometer riding your bike in Toronto than in 68 kilometers in Toronto, which is kind of wild when you consider how common your vehicle collisions and accidents are. This was a study local out of Calgary, so at the foothills, the Level 1 Trauma Hospital. And this just looked at people coming in with serious bike injuries, trying to compare kind of road versus mountain. And they found that, unfortunately, road cyclists get hit by cars, while mountain bikers either fall off cliffs or jumps or some sort of bike park tricks. Again, middle-aged males are the culprit. Head injuries were pretty common, followed by spine. So, devastating injuries, head trauma and spine trauma, those have lifelong consequences, and I'm sure you can imagine. And then extremity fractures. A third of these patients required surgery, and a quarter of them required admission to intensive care. So that's pretty impressive. Serious injuries. And 17 deaths over the course of 14 years.
And I think it's worth noting here as well, and this statistic is bound to be changing with the growth of mountain biking as an industry. But in 2011, I remember statistics showing how many more injuries in road biking were more injuries per kilometer and more severe injuries per kilometer in road biking. Again, I think that's shifted in the past decade with the advent of more readily available high geared mountain bikes and mountain bike parts, which were more exposed. But there's a lot of people who have a belief that those who get injured cycling are just those stupid mountain bikers out there, yahoos. And if I'm on the road, I'm safe. But this shows us that obviously that is not true. So
I think a lot has been put into improving road safety for bikes. So there's better lanes in Toronto, in Calgary, and even here we've got the legacy trail. So we're no longer sitting on the shoulder of the Trans Canada Highway, but there's definitely lots more work that needs to be done. This next study is out of Vancouver. Yeah, so kind of similar study. They just collated their bike injuries coming into the trauma center at Vancouver General Hospital over a 10-year period. They showed that the bike injuries were increasing dramatically, almost exponentially. So threefold over the 10-year study period. And fractures, brain injuries, spine injuries, again, being the most common. And 2/3 of patients in the study got surgery. So again, significant. This one was my favorite study, straight out of Whistler. So this is just over 1 year. Data collected at the Whistler Clinic. So anything significant enough to go straight to Vancouver, bypass. So these are kind of walking wounded, maybe ground transport by EMS, middle-aged men, mostly fractures of the upper extremity. So clavicles, wrists, hand fractures, about 10% or 11% brain injuries. And 10% required surgery or ICU care. So if you hurt yourself in Whistler, you have a 1 in 10 chance of ending up with surgery or ICU. That's kind of crazy when you think of that.
can you clarify TBI as well? Just
Traumatic brain injury.
So the spectrum of traumatic brain injury can be from concussion to bleeding in your brain, needing evacuative surgery or dying. So it's a broad spectrum. That's why it's just important to lay that out.
So pretty alarming. We unfortunately here locally don't have the numbers specifically, although it'd be great to collect them, at least over a season. But for sure, anecdotally, mountain biking is the most common cause of traumatic injury that we see here at Banff over the summer. Fractures are the most common for us, but that's because anything from head, spine just goes to the city. And the fractures that we're seeing are broken clavicles, broken wrists, I've seen broken ankles, broken tibias. So lots of extremity trauma. And the significance of this is, yes, you may need surgery, but even if you don't, you're still in a cast or a sling for 6 weeks. You're still 6 weeks seeing Jacob for physio. So that's your summer plus some. So it's significant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared. I'll be honest, I started looking at these numbers and it's like, oh man. Do I really want to be doing this? And again, the point is, like, it is a dangerous sport, and so we need to prepare, just like we would for anything else that we're doing that has consequences. You wouldn't go climbing without checking your gear and being physically fit and prepared. We shouldn't sit on our bike after having 3 beers at the pub and, and go the Bay line in the store. So anyway. These guys are going to take over and they're going to talk to you about some of the strategies to not end up seeing the summer.
I don't know where this picture came from.
3 years.
2 days ago, yeah. So you can see right away that when I'm riding the double black trail, it's fully padded, even though it's a hassle on a hot summer day to wear pads and go up there. It certainly isn't nice, but it's much less nice when I'm not wearing those pads and I scrape out my elbow off and so on and trying to get fleshy disease. Yeah. So wear bike pads. I rode a mountain bike because there have been probably the most changes to mountain biking in terms of growth of industry. The actual frame structure and ride structure has changed a lot, but a lot of what I say will touch directly on road biking and more recreational commuter type bikes. So types of injuries that you tend to see, Michaela's gone through the traumatic ones, and I kind of came down on the TBI one for a reason. I still frequently see people riding around town without a helmet. And it just shocks me because I remember when I first moved here, there was a story of a fellow who I think was married one of our nurses who was on the Legacy Trail, nice mellow ride, did an endo, smoked his head, and good night and reading time. So it's so easy to wear a helmet. And the consequences of not having it if you crash are so high that it just doesn't damage me. The other one that I often see that blows my mind is when parents are riding around without a helmet, they got their kids on their kiddie seat or behind them. And it's like, why do you think that the kid's gonna, believe that helmets are a good thing? Kids are little minds, they love to see what we do and pick it up. So as soon as that kid's out of your eyes, first thing they're gonna do is doff their helmet. So I often find that a funny one. So do feel free to, say Dr. McIsaac chastises you if they are sad that you've interrupted their good time set in my way. The next kind of thing that we tend to see, so after traumatic, that I see a lot of in sport med practice is overuse things. And out here we see that a lot because we have the Olympic-minded crowd, everybody's always getting it. I mean, already the trail has been smashed to bits and it's only been dry for a week. Most common ones are tendons, and you see tendon injuries at every part of the body. Mountain bikes, handlebars have gotten wider and wider and wider. If you look at the races from 10 years ago, their hands would have been in here like this, more of a kind of narrow push-up position. Me, I've got fairly large wide handlebars at 825. You can see how my elbows stack way further to the side of my shoulders from here. And so if you're getting a new bike and you get a new set of handlebars and it changes even from here to out there, those are new forces that are coming into your wrist, into your elbow, into your shoulder, and a little bit into your neck, as it changes what your power base is and how upright you are. And Jacob's going to get into T-spine next time. Finger tendinopathies, so you get a creaky finger that doesn't like to move. Snapping fingers or locking fingers can develop with this. The most frequent one I see that's handlebar related, I'd say, would be elbow tendonitis. A lot of times when we're riding mountain bikes, particularly but any bike, you're brake ready. So one finger, some people two, is ready for the brake. You've always got that slightly extended and slightly ready, so it's under chronic tension during your ride. Chronic tension drives tendon injury, especially when it's repeated day after day after day, week after week after week. Shoulder injury, tendonitis in the shoulders. When we tend to bike, a lot of us tend to get a little bit forward and rounded in our shoulders. It's harder to keep an upright back, a loose T-spine, and a stable core when we got a seat to put our bum on and we can be lazy and just hang around. And so rounding out our back, getting these weak shoulders can lead to some tendonitis up here in your rotator cuff, which I think Jake will also talk about. Low back pain, very frequently related to iliopsoas tendon. A lot of people are confused by that because the iliopsoas is one of our hip flexors, just to draw our knee up like that. You do this thousands and thousands and thousands of times when you ride a bike, and it comes off of the inside of your back. And so this one, getting a tendonitis or a bursitis, some people will feel it in the front of their hip with pinching, soreness, ache, inability to get their foot up over like that. A lot of people will feel it back here and they say, why is my back sore? It's not my hip, it's my back. So it's something that a good physio like Jake will pick up on and work out and stretch out with you. Knee, you can end up with patellar tendonitis, quad tendonitis, foot, Achilles tendonitis. Peroneal, I'd say, is probably the one I most commonly see, which is around the back lateral side of the heel. And that comes from particularly these evil things. Can you pass to one of my shoes, Michaela? And these are evil. Clip shoes, stiff carbon bottom, no mobility. Then your foot jams into the pedal with the clip. You don't move that anymore either. So you have 2 points of complete immobility and you're pedaling around without strokes. And so these things tend to like to drive overuse injuries a little bit. So do be aware if you're clipped in and you find that you're getting sore tendons, you can switch like I have to the Frank Brothers fit. A lot of people complain that they wear down easily because they have a lot of float, and they do. But it tends to diminish the overuse side of it. You see in the foot and ankle is you can vary your position without popping out, and you can vary it quite easily versus, and I know Shimano has updated theirs to be less bindy, but what do we know? 12 years ago when I was training for the Trans Rockies, I ended up giving myself quite a Morton's from some very stiff FPD pedals where my foot never moved for my 3 hours or more riding each time. So that moves us into our next one, will be nerve injuries. So tendon injuries can happen everywhere. That's the, you got a sore thing from biking, probably think tendon injury first. Hop in to see your physiotherapist to work that out. If that's not jiving, then you can see a guy like me and I can needle him with cortisone, which we don't really like to do because then I can tell you to take a few weeks off biking, and that just sucks. So nerve injuries, and this is one that's pretty pertinent to road specifically, but
Compression neuropathies are frequent. I just mentioned the one in the foot. So from tight binding shoe wear, from immobility on a pedal, clip jamming in, you can end up with the nerves between the long bones of the foot becoming irritated, swollen, painful. And this hurts. In pathology textbooks, they name it as one of the 10 painful lesions of the body, which it is. It's nasty. I've had one cut out and it felt a lot better to have the surgery than it felt to have it in their own. I see patients for them frequently who are asking me to do something with them. And it's tough because they're resistant and our treatment options are great. So if you start getting some midfoot pain and you're using cleats, give a consideration to changing things up, moving the cleat, or seeing somebody for a bike fit or changing shoes. The other major point of nerves is in the hand. So here when we're gripping, we have our median nerve from pressing like that, and that gives you your classic carpal tunnel, waking up in the middle of the night, shaking it out. If you're on a bike ride and frequently you find yourself taking your hand off to shake out your hand, start taking it off a minute earlier before you have to do that. That's telling you that there's not enough blood supply getting to that nerve because it's sitting in that compressed state. It wants its blood. So think to yourself as you're biking, make sure you relieve all these pressure points before they start telling you it's a problem. The one that's more common in road cyclists, especially when you have the hoods, is going to be a compression ulnar neuropathy at what's called Gillen's canal over here. That's the nerve that affects these two guys, spreading the finger strength. And so if you start noticing more pain or numbness into the fourth and fifth finger, and you're a road biker who's on that position a lot, that's likely compression neuropathy. You can look at things like different bar tape if you haven't upgraded it in a few years and it's really flat. You can look at different bar shapes that change the position where it is. A lot of bars are set on straight like this with your brakes, and you can actually curve them inwards to spread the source of compression across both zones to decrease that. And then of course there are gloves. Oh, what do I do with my gloves? Great. Let me grab it. A lot of gloves have gel pads in them. A lot of them don't, so you can ride without. I choose to ride with a very simple glove because I find that it alerts me more quickly to the compression when I feel it. And these are what I use for biking, road and mountain. They're also very useful at pub actors. So consider your gloves though. I found that some people love the gel ones and others it actually creates a big problem because they just sit and hang out with the gel compressing and think they're doing very cool. Okay. Then the next one would be that I tend to see would be environmental. Move this out of the way. First one, environmental out here. It's actually probably cold exposure. Then if you get out past a wet day like this, if you're riding and it's cold and your feet get wet, you can end up with frostbite if it's cold enough. The chill blades is the other one. It's not quite a frostbite, but it's where a cold wet injury gets you. Think trench foot from World War I kind of thing, where that wet foot just hangs out there. You're okay. You know you only got another 10 kilometers to go. So if your toes start turning purple for a little while after, it may not be COVID toes, you might have just given yourself credit for biking. The sun, of course, is out in force soon, hopefully. Sunburns, easy one. This is my Moab tattoo from when I missed a little spot when I was in Moab. This was only a plus 16 day in Moab. One season I had a very nice decoration of a helmet on my head when I realized partway through Gold Creek that I hadn't used sunscreen. So consider sunscreen, consider your hydration. If you've got only one bottle cage, or if you're on an older Yeti like I was here and no bottle cage, make sure you got a pack full of water, plan for that. Insects, they hurt, they bug you, they itch. No, I gotta leave my own stuff. And then gear as well. So consider what you're wearing. Is it appropriate for the day? Weather can change in a hurry out here. You know, I've got a little 6-liter backpack. A lot of people are now wearing little fanny packs where you jam in a raincoat in addition to a couple of bike tools that are small and easy to carry, a spare tube. We can get pretty remote pretty quickly out here, and you can get outside of cell service fairly easily on our trails. And it's a bad spot to be found where you're cold and wet, where you got a broken component you can't get out. So take the time to talk to your bike mechanics about what simple things that you can bring with you that don't weigh too much. I know we're all weighing these. Every extra pound is 3 or 4 watts uphill. But do consider what you would be able to do if you got lost in the wilderness. Do you have the skills that you can fix a tire? Yeah, the skills that you could stuff into these little bacon strips are beautiful when you got a carrier sidewall here. So there's lots of little ways to keep you riding and keep you safe when you're out there. So consider what you're wearing. Tonight, I wore these mountain bike pants, which are a big thing that's been making a big wave over the past few years. They're kind of nice because you can ride a little bit in the cold. I'll ride these right into winter.
They're also nice because if you, let's say, not wearing your pads because you're on a more mellow bike and you're falling, scrape yourself up, then you got a layer of material to take you to use first, so that's kind of handy. Road biking, often we're wearing a lot less, we're wearing spandex, things super tight to the skin, so it falls, and we've seen this in Giro de France and Giro d'Italia. People come up from what looks like a minor fall and they're just painted with blood, and so you got nothing between you and the road is hard. So that's worth considering when it comes to gear. Before I let Jacob take over, he's gonna talk a lot about injury prevention, but there's a few things that kind of come to mind with that. I think he's gonna talk a lot about fitness. The only thing I'd say about fitness, and I said this to him a few minutes ago, was it's amazing what you can do to maintain bike fitness now. If these trainers you set up in your garage, you got a computer program on your phone, it beams a little video game into you, you can ride your bike all year long. And you come out onto the trails and you're speed of light, you're fitter than you were last year, but you haven't balanced all winter long. You've just been sitting your butt on a stable platform. And you're zipping along at 30 kilometers an hour in the woods, you hit a rock that wasn't there last season because the rain moved it, and now you're heading for a treat. So consider that fitness doesn't necessarily transfer directly to all bike fitness. And consider that cross training is also good. I've just described a variety of overuse injuries that I tend to see a variety of people for all year long, all summer long. A lot of them are the people who were on their trainer all winter. They didn't do any physio, they didn't do any maintenance. They weren't out cross country skiing, they weren't out touring. So find some other activities that you love, get out there, tour, cross country ski, it's painful, but some people like.
Winters are skiing.
That's right. The other one that I find is really fun is people will spend hours and hours and hours on their fitness, getting their heart rate going, and they'll spend 0 hours on their skills. So who here, and this might be mountain bike specific, but who here has practiced doing a track stand in your garage on their bike? Track stand is where you don't move, you're holding 1, maybe 2 brakes, and you try to hold that position. You see guys doing it at the intersection. Practice it, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of boring, but you start doing it, you start getting it, it's like, this is really handy. Then you're up on the trail and you're like, I don't know if I can drop this feature that suddenly I find myself on. And instead of being down the feature because you don't know how to slow down, you actually had the ability to stop, take a peek, think about it, and go. And that was one of the best lessons that was ever taught to me by a phenomenal cyclist out in Squamish. Was he says, learn to go slow in order to go fast. And I spent the whole season with his lessons, learning to go slow. And all of my times have gotten faster on throttle when I'm not trying. And all of my feelings of safety have heightened greatly as I can look at a feature, think about it, process it, and do it all under complete control rather than looking at it, hoping and praying and making it through 95% of the time. So take a lesson. We were going to potentially bring somebody in, but we didn't. But there are a few people who teach around the valley, like Ryan Draper, Cycling 101. I think he's got a couple other hymns. I don't know who else does some teaching. But yeah, go to Squamish and ride with Nate. That's the guy I'm talking about. He's mint. He's just a beauty of you too.
Trail sports does camps and classes as well.
RSVC as well.
Shred Sisters.
Yeah, that's been, Shred Sisters, Dirt Queens, Trek Dirt Series. That's one thing I really, when you get the statistic about it, it's really all of it. Just how supportive the female mountain biking community, particularly, how supportive they are of all one another. You know, guys are always out on their own. I'm chasing Strava, I'm doing this, and then you see this group, they're all having fun. It's Shred Sisters, they're all having a blast, they're working on skills, they're all high-fiving each other. I'm like, what's great for them. So do consider taking a look at those groups because they are wonderful. E-bike was something I just wanted to quickly mention. I've had people develop injuries from e-biking traumatically when it takes off on them and they're not used to it. So practice your e-bike if you're going to get one to know what it has for power. And the other thing is actually lifting them onto a rack. So e-bikes are heavy. I picked one up out of my buddy's truck the other day after he's had an injury. And man, that was hard. That hurt my shoulder. There are racks that now come with little ramps on them. And so that's pretty sweet because one thing I love is to see people who I know are injured from a hip or a knee, and you talk about an e-bike and I see them out on the trail. And that's just wonderful to me because it keeps them being active despite their injury, or people feel like they're aging out of their sport, then they can jump on an e-bike and keep on going. So if you are e-biking, consider the extra weight, consider the extra injury potential from that momentum that they can create. And yeah, do investigate if you need a rack. I can't remember the name of it. I looked it up with a patient the other day, but it was great. Just slid it up this little ramp that came on the side, made it easy. All right, that's probably enough for me. Jacob.
Anybody have any questions for Matt about any gear recommendations or saddles?
Oh, saddles, that's a good one. I didn't even think of saddles. Yeah, saddles are tough. Every saddle company is gonna tell you they came up with a thing that fixed the prostate pressure or this or that, and that's usually what it is. A lot of times they'll gear saddles to women and say, we made this really wide, cushy saddle, that might be terrible. It's your distance between your ischial tuberosities, the sit bones is what's important when you're picking a saddle, and any good bike shop or any good bike fit will have that for you. You sit down on a little thing, you leave an impression, you can measure the distance between the two, and then you go buy your saddle for it. The best place I found for this, I hate to not give any of our local bike shops props, but the best place is in Calgary, TCR Bikes. It's kind of just off Bow Trail, this direction, just outside of downtown. And they're wonderful. They'll spend 2 days with you just sitting a seat, going through detailed bike. Absolutely worth your money if you consider that you're going to be riding 3 or 4 days a week, all through the summer and sometimes through the winter. You go and spend $300 on one of these, extreme level bike fits. It's going to have it set up perfectly. You're going to avoid all these compression and all of these tendon irritations I talked about. You'll avoid getting saddle soreness. Some of the things that, prostate pressure is one of the big arguments they make, and no saddle has been shown to specifically alleviate prostate stuff better than any other. Each company will show you their paper. None of them actually do the job when they're tested diffusely. You got to find the right fit for you. So that is a tough one. Problems that can also come with that are more male particular compression in that area can lead to varicoceles and hydroceles, which are painful swellings in the reproductive area, and those can derail a season or a life of biking surgery. So it is worth taking your time to get a proper saddle fit. Myself, I've had saddle problems from when I was riding in the beginning, and I've actually landed on a Brooks Cambium, which all my buddies look at and ask why the riding support changer would think. It's a firm laminated plastic. It looks horrible. There's zero cushion on it. But once again, for me and my body, it's very responsive. I start to feel right away if I'm in the wrong position too long, and I can shift a little bit. Over time, it also has broken down and softened, so it works wonderfully for me. Other people I know love the Brooks leather saddle because that really breaks in over time. Some people are perfect on a specialized. They have these little short ones now. They give a shorter nubbin than the class old thing, so you got a little bit more room for anything up front to sit. But you got a little less room to move for an aft on the saddle, which maybe you avoid if you're climbing or descending a lot or need to be on more janky terrain. So that's status. Possible status.
Cool.
So for the person who has the ACL injury, is stroke better than one time?
Yeah, I would say that you're less likely to find yourself in a moment where you need to suddenly put your foot down at speed on a turn, which is the only time I really worry about an ACL injury on a mountain bike. Yeah, so I'd say road biking is, that much more safe depending on your skill level. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I think when you're on your bike, you're safe. It's the step offs the bike that are tricky with an ACL, right? Because you don't have that proprioception and stability to support yourself on uneven ground. So generally for people that are rehabbing an ACL after surgery or that are having ACL injury and electing not to treat it surgically, then just avoiding those step offs on the bike. So either super easy trails on the mountain bike or road biking.
You mentioned figures getting sore. Sometimes I am building on longer rides and then I'm going to shape on it. So that's never worry about or how to, I guess I should move around.
Moving around a little bit there. Again, check the grip tape. It's old and worn. That little added layer of a new grip tape for like $20 might make a huge difference. And then does it wake you up at night? No. And do you lose strength in your hands all
At the time,
Does it go away right away?
usually I shake it out of it.
Yeah, so unless that's getting worse, and if it is getting worse, come see me and I'll set up another production test so we can see whether or not we need to have that injector or anything like that. But as long as at the time you take it out, everything comes back 5 minutes after your ride, all your problems on, it doesn't bother you through the day or reading books or laying, it's just dead, you're probably fine.
Do you think it's an indicator of not good posture or just staying in the same position too long?
Could be both. Could be neck sitting a little pinchy from being a little hunchy like this and the T-spine mobility. Pressing nerves gently in the shoulder. Then on your elbow position, you get some pressure there too. But then yes, the non-positionality would be kind of the biggest culprit. That if you're really, perfect posture, everything is great, but you never move from that one spot, yeah, that's gonna catch you.
The differential is whether it's your neck or your wrist, because if it is a road bike, it could happen on a mountain bike too, but you can literally just test yourself by looking up at the ceiling for 30 seconds. If your hands start to go numb, it might be your neck as well.
Seems like a good segue for James.
Cool. So these guys scared you a lot about a whole bunch of different things. And more or less the real changeable safety tips that you can take away from perhaps our session, but maybe some future sessions that we might put on would be both in terms of a bike fit, training effectively, strength programming, and something that we're not going to cover a lot of tonight is aerobic and anaerobic fitness, and how to properly train those aspects. As I move through the number of topics, just kind of a little bit of an outline of how I'm planning on doing it. I'm going to present you with a bit of information. I'm going to be up and moving in a number of different ways. I'm going to call on some volunteers in terms of being a bit of a test dummy in terms of how we're going to set you up for some specific exercises. And if you're that test dummy, then you get a prize from Outside Cycle, which is a water bottle and a gift card. Cool. So basics. If you're serious about training and you're serious about becoming a better athlete in any sport, then you start to think about what is that sport? McIsaac basically means it's a year-long process. You divide those up into mesocycles, which is more or less 1 month cycles, meso. And within those month-long cycles, we start to think about weeks, and then eventually each day. And the whole idea is that if you want to plan to be good at something, we should develop a strategy to do so. And that strategy might change throughout the whole season, but at least you have a plan, and it's okay to alter from that plan, but we want to think ahead. And with that, depending on your season's goal, and Matt chatted about this a little bit as well, we're going to have volume. So just kind of like spending time on your bike, how hard you're pushing on the bike, and then what amount of technique that you may need to practice for biking. So technique on mountain bike is, pretty obvious. It's how you corner, how you go over jumps, where your body position is, and where you're looking before the turn, for example. I leave that aside for just a moment. Who can think of road biking technique? What does that even mean? Got like an idea? Who has technique when they road bike? What does that mean? It could be like choosing the right gear. Yeah, we can go with that one. We can think of it on a couple of different levels. So one example would be 1 foot in a cleat and just pedaling with one leg, trying to have equal force going around that crank arm. And a lot of people are just thinking about the simple push, 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 as opposed to getting that smooth stroke going around the whole pedal crank rotation. And so that's one aspect. Are you actually using all of the muscle groups around the leg rather than overusing one of those areas? So you can subdivide that in that crank arm. We kind of have a push forward, we have coming down, pushing down, we have a scrape backwards, and then we have a pull up. And so it's actually an interesting drill if you're looking for a bit of a pre-ride warm up or an off-season sort of technique building for any form of cyclist, just with 1 foot. Let's do 2 minutes of cycling and change the foot, do 2 minutes of cycling. And it's actually a lot harder than you think it would be. Use an easier gear, but can you access each of those 4 aspects of a square, so to speak? So other aspects we're thinking of, when do you want to peak? Most people are wanting to peak in terms of when do you by peak? When do you want to be in your best condition? When do you want to either have a race or a goal event? Maybe you want to ride up to Highwood Pass for June 15th. So you might need to start your training a little bit earlier if you're not, don't have a lot of mileage on you from previous seasons of biking. And then what might get in the way of training? Do you have like, well, I almost always get sick in the wintertime. I have like the sport conference that I go to, and my family goes on a vacation in these months. So you can kind of train and build all those things into a training block. So it's just a kind of an ounce of prevention gives you that future foresight. So this is just a bit of a picture to describe all of those 3 things. So typically in the beginning of the season, if we're thinking about road biking or if we're thinking about gaining cardio, we're spending a lot of time in volume. We're spending a lot of hours on our bike initially, but with not a very high intensity. So we don't want to push too hard right out of the starting blocks. If we do that, we're going to end up with no reduced injury. We want to slowly build into that. Along with that, you're probably not practicing a ton of technique early in the season. A lot of, like, for example, you want to build up some cardiovascular ability on your trainer prior to go out mountain biking in the early season. So you're not really practicing technique when you're on the trainer, but as soon as you do start to get outside and it's shoulder season, theoretically, your volume and time on the bike might actually drop a little bit as your focus on technique and skills goes up, depending on what that looks like for you. So let's just get like a season goal from some person. Give me an idea. What's a goal for the season? It doesn't have to be anything extreme. Where do people want to bike? Razor's Edge. All right, cool. And would your goal be to go on Razor's Edge, or something of that similar nature, kind of throughout the whole season, or that's like the peak? If you can get to that, you're going to be happy.
Like read August.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, Razor's Edge is a combination of all of these aspects, because you have to first kind of have a cardio background that you're going to be able to get up to the base, I guess, up the Fire Road, Quake Valley, and up the trail towards Jewel Pass. And so you need to be able to have fairly good zone 2 control. You don't want to be redlining it so that you can arrive fairly fresh before the technical descent. So hopefully with that, you've spent a fair bit of time in zone 2 training earlier on in the season, but now you're adding a little bit of interval work, because there's going to be some fairly technical steps on the actual single track trail to get to the start of the descent for that. Along with that, we're thinking, oh man, but it's a double black trail. Like, your technique needs to be up on par. So I think like this sort of graph aligns pretty well with that sort of objective. But this graph may not align very well with someone that just does downhill biking. They don't really need to spend a ton of time with not spending much time on technique early in the season. Yeah, maybe they do need to spend some time on intensity, but they're not necessarily spending time on intensity in terms of like pedaling uphill with intensity work. They're spending time on intensity on like pushing through the corners and doing a lot of, I guess, downhill control, core tension based activities for managing the risk on the way down. And then another extreme opposite analysis here would be, let's say your goal was to ride a 500 or 1,000 kilometer gravel race, bikepacking race, for example. These guys, yeah, a little bit of technique, but they probably don't need to peak way up here. So maybe like the technique comes down around here, but their volume training is, for the most part, it's in the off season, like it's going to build up, and they're probably going to stay fairly high on the volume department. They need to be able to fight a long time, but not necessarily super quickly. So a fair bit less time spent in terms of interval work or intensity work. So yeah, just kind of like some thoughts as to how do you manage based off of your goals, what those 3 components are. Some other components for year-long training who actually builds in recovery weeks or recovery days, purposely built into your program, so you don't get those overuse injuries. Generally, we think that it could be 2 or 3 or maybe 4 weeks if you're very good at recovering, building each week in terms of the mileage or amount of time that you're spending on your bike, and then take about 50%, 60% of your maximum week for the recovery week, and you should come back into your next build block feeling like you're very well rested. This would be an example of regular periodization. Reverse periodization would be the opposite. You take a recovery week and then you do your biggest week first, and then it gradually gets easier as you get more fatigued. In this example, you get more and more fatigued, your tissues actually get more and more tired, and it can be a good training load if you don't get an injury, but going the opposite direction actually means that you mitigate injury risk, so long as you know what your greatest amount of time on the bike that you can withstand in that first week is. The whole purpose here is, even if you don't care about like building each week, it's making sure that you take at least once a month, a week of less amount of activity to let your body super compensate and become stronger. So often the discussions I have with people when they're coming in with an injury is just the fact that they didn't allow their bodies to recover. Then they ended up getting fatigued and they ended up with an overuse injury, or they're fatigued on the trail and they crash. That's sort of idea.
This is real easy in the winter on roof of your Swift, because you can just program it in. But when you get beauty sunny days in a row and it's 60K a week, that can be pretty killer mentally. So that's beach time, that's fishing time.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess I didn't really like specifically highlight it here, but strength training is the secret weapon to preventing injuries in addition to the right programming. And so I want to go through just like, I'm not going to tell you every detail about the study. Let's just go through the conclusion more or less. In this study, they found strength training improved your endurance performance because it allowed you to have a higher lactate threshold and greater leg strength. So lactate threshold is more or less, you can imagine if you're sprinting or on your bike and really pushing hard for a period of time, you're going to eventually start to go slower because you have a buildup of lactate, or people might call it lactic acid, which is a misnomer. And because of that lower pH, more acidity in your blood, you end up having to go slower. So by strength training, you can actually tolerate more of this lactate in your blood. So you can push harder or longer, and you develop, guess what? Strength training gives you stronger legs. Surprise, surprise. Okay, the next one, maximal strength training improves your cycling economy, efficiency, and time to exhaustion at maximal aerobic power. So aerobic power, generally, we would put someone on the bike and we'd say, sprint, go as hard as you can for about 5 minutes. Maximal aerobic power test. And so within a 5-minute maximal aerobic power test, you can be more efficient, burning less calories, and you could go for longer if you have greater strength. So you're becoming less fatigued when you're on the bike, especially in those power moments where you have to push really hard for at least 5 minutes. Next one. Added strength training to usual endurance training improves leg strength, and another 5-minute all-out performance, but this one's interesting, after over 3 hours of cycling in well-trained cyclists. So even for people who believe that they're a great cyclist, adding in strength training means that after you've been biking for 3 hours, you can still push harder than the average person. And the stat on that one was you could produce 29 more watts, if watts mean anything to you, than the people who worked strength training. That's actually a pretty significant amount. So over that 5-minute sprint, the people who are strength training could produce 29 more watts, which in a road cycling race or maybe a cross-country mountain biking race would mean you can probably improve your position at the end of the race. That's pretty significant.
You're commuting, you can show up to work and not be sweaty.
And last piece of research that I wanted to show you here, core fatigue. So in this research study, they took people, they ended up having them do a core fatiguing circuit of exercises, and then they looked at how much their knee moved in comparison to pre-fatigue of the core versus post-fatigue of the core. And after they fatigued their core, their knee moved a whole bunch more. So what's this suggesting? That if you can improve your core stability, you probably can improve your lower body alignment. And we're theorizing here, the research doesn't say it, but if your knee is tracking better, there's probably a better chance of not getting a lower body injury. Not to say that it's necessarily going to improve the amount of power that you can create with the bike, but it's just an injury prevention strategy. Questions about any of those strength things?
There's a lot of info.
Yeah, more or less strength training is really helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, from like injury prevention, what makes you bike faster for longer and be less tired. And that's why I'm calling it that secret sauce. It's something that you can work on, and it makes you feel better, have an easier life, and bike easier. Yeah. So for me, I just wanted to think about like a needs analysis. So I was like standing in my office being like, okay, if I'm on the bike or and I'm looking at pictures and measuring the goniometer with the knee angle, like what is the amount of knee range of motion, hip range of motion that we need to have as we cycle uphill and flats? This is fairly useful for both mountain biking and road biking. We have approximately 10 to 110 degrees of knee flexion as we go around that pedal stroke. We have approximately 30 to 70 degrees of hip flexion And we need to be able to drive up with the hip and push down with the hip of the glute. The ankle doesn't move a lot. There is ankle movement, obviously, but the ankle doesn't move a lot, and we're not creating a lot of force to go forward. We're not necessarily thinking about doing a calf raise swoop at the bottom of every step. We're thinking about keeping the foot fairly flat to the floor. I'm not sure if you've ever caught your toe mountain biking on something, but sometimes if you held your pedal flatter, that can prevent that from happening. Core tension, we just kind of mentioned why that was important previously. Mountain biking downhill, often one foot forward is your strong leg. And with that front foot forward, we're thinking 45 to 90 degrees through that hip. We're creating stability. Often that's coming from glute, hamstring, lower back stability to hold that hip in 45 to 90 degrees flexion, depending on the leg. Yeah, basically, I was just thinking about analysis of that position. We're heading downhill, and what are we doing? We're standing up and we're pushing away and we're coming back down into these sorts of positions. So we can start to subdivide what that means and make you stronger, sport specifically for those. Remembering that this isn't going to help you with maybe overuse, background injury stuff. Maybe there's some other things that are causing you pain and limitation, but they're going to make you stronger for biking.
I'm going to debate one point on there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Second to last, the ankle movement. If you watch a very skilled downhill mountain biker, you'll see that their heel is pinned straight down. It's a huge break. So ankle mobility in your forward foot is quite key. If you want to see that, go on YouTube, Google Remy Metalier, who's a rider on the Squamish, and you'll see him when he does some of these drops and stops dead. His heel is almost somehow under his foot. The guy's got crazy ankle mobility. So when it comes to downhill braking and sudden force generation into a controlled brake, that ankle mobility in the front ankle particularly is key. Sorry.
No, appreciate it. So we kind of went over what are some of the common injuries that can present already. I'm not going to go over that again. They exist and often come down to programming or strength or mobility problems. And so with that, I want to start to go through a little bit of an idea as to how you should structure strength training throughout a season, what that would look like, and what could be encapsulated within those programs. So for everyone, let's move chairs and we're going to get people up and moving. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
All right, cool. Volunteer number one, who wants to take home a gift card? Come on down. Okay, so the whole idea of what I'm going to run through is a little bit of a warm up. Some of the aspect here, just saying maybe you're special and you've got some injury in the background that might be related to a pinchy neck that leaves you with numb hands, and it's because you've got a tight thoracic spine. So maybe there's some specific things that would be best for you in this picture. But let's just go through some really basic things. Spine and lunge stretch. I'll demo now. You go one foot in front and one foot behind. You're going to feel as you push this back knee straight, you should feel hip flexor stretch. You should maybe get a groin/hamstring/glute stretch. And then as you open up to the right, ooh, you can feel a little bit of a thoracic opener/stretch.
Yeah.
And now the challenge here, here's a little bit of challenge. We're going to stand up onto a single leg and balance. Oh,
Are we?
yeah. And then ideally take a very long step and repeat that on the other side. All right, let's maybe this half of the class, let's take 1 or 2 steps and then the other half you should do.
Oh, yeah.
Don't be ashamed. Yeah, I see you right there.
I feel
That would, I'd really be upset.
I made it look,
Yeah.
few weeks.
How do you pull that part?
Just enough time to go into the sliding. That looks really good. Everyone can put in the sneeze to that's the big stretch the back and open it up. Perfect. And then stand up. You're just hanging out in the bottom of the stretch for a moment. In a perfect world, the palm of the hand is on the ground, not just you can never stick it up.
That's the inside.
Inside hand, yeah, back knee straight line. Like those little things.
That's spider.
So that's a spider lunge. And we're getting a whole bunch of things. My purpose with this is let's maximum time efficiency. Let's just like get you into the stuff that matters. This is just a warm-up so we can focus on the strength stuff. Okay, single leg hip hinge next volunteer. Perfect. So a single leg hip hinge is a build on a 2-leg hip hinge. So watching my back should not move if I do this hinge movement, pushing my bum behind, usually on 2 legs. Great, so I'm here to just pull people apart. Back is rounding a little bit. I'm not sure if people will see that. Can you arch your a little bit more? So that would be probably closer to your neutral. And then squeeze your bum and stand back up. And let's do that again. Don't let your back move. And see just at that end, the back starts to move a little bit. You put your hand on your lower back. And feel that as you push your bum back. And stop as soon as you feel your hamstrings. Yeah, that's great. And squeeze bum back up. So one more time. Good. Everybody, let's get that dial in first. This where okay, so knees are a soft bend, and we're pushing the bone back as much as you can from the wall behind you. You feel the weight go on your heels. Yeah. Looks so straight and rounded.
So it's around here.
Come on, back up.
Yeah.
Feel that small ears out as you push back. Please, that's the. Or just I think a keep it totally underneath. Say, it was a little bit rounded.
There you start to. Yeah.
There, you feel your hamstrings, yeah. So you go past feeling your hamstrings, your pelvis is going to round under, and then your back will also. So that's the end range for you. As soon as your bottom back up. So this is a pretty important skill, not just from like a one-up perspective, but if you're on your bike and you want to keep your back neutral so that you can engage your leg muscles as much as possible, you need to be able to figure out where neutral is. A lot of people, as you get tired, slowly going to round out on you. Especially in road cycling, we want to be able to find that neutral and in your ready position when you're ready to start diving down steep things if you're mountain biking. Okay, next volunteer. So this is actually pretty easy. We figured out most of that 2-legged hip hinge. Now we're going to do it on a single leg. Okay, so doing a really good job here. And really like that. And can you do that in face for the yeah, right? It's the meeting stack. Okay, so let's face this direction and do that again for me. So I'm gonna give you 80% so far. Let's go down to the bottom. I'm gonna pause there again. We should feel the hips back to the wall behind, weight on the heel. And then we just want to make sure that the pelvis is flat, pretty flat. So in a perfect world, we would, drop that right side just a little bit and now we're sitting as a flat. We want to squeeze the left, we just stand back up.
So the leg doesn't have to go very high.
Leg does not have to go high. In fact, you're going to stop once again as soon as you start to feel that hamstring stretch and squeeze the button to stand back up. Try it again here. It gives you a good balance challenge. So a little bit more of a tilt on that side, right? Drop the left down. And of course, that requires really good right hip stability. A mirror is a nice idea for this one. You can kind of place a broomstick on your back, and as you go down, you can more or less balance that broomstick and ask, how is that sitting? Is it sitting flat? We need to change that rotation. Let's give it a go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Feel free to give each other feedback. Let your partner know if their pelvis is flat at the bottom. Make sure your butt is towards the wall behind you, so you're maximally loading your hamstring and glutes.
Yeah, you find it. It's just-
It's there.
We were.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice for guys over here. This one, other than warming up tissue, or warming up the brain, or certain of control. All right, next one's also a little bit of a balance control. I'll just demo this one. So if I was to do a pigeon stretch from yoga, glute stretch on the floor, it would look like this. If I'm going to do it in standing, I'm going to stand and balance on single leg. We're going to draw it up, and then we switch sides and draw it up. All of these one-round exercises are just one in sequence after the other, holding things. We just asking that tissue to feel less. Perfect world, hands around the knee, hands around the chin, pull it up, pull the knee towards the opposite shoulder to get that glute stretch, and then switch it up.
Do you mind if I use you as an example?
No.
Yeah, so this is something I should have mentioned earlier in my part. A chronic injury you can come into biking with when you're having trouble getting some of these ranges, or if you're having trouble getting your pedal around correctly, like why can't I seem to get up in this pedal stroke with my hip always hurts, is you could have arthritis. And so Mike recently had one of his hips done because he's surprised had it and able to do many things, go biking. I've got videos of this guy doing backflips on his skis. And so it can be amazing what you can still go and get out and do and have an arthritic joint underlying. So sometimes you'll come to me and be like, yeah, McIsaac, you said that I'm going to have a hip tendonitis. And I'll x-ray and then I come in and give you this horrible news about your hip arthritis. Don't hit me. I'm sorry, but it can happen. So if you do find that there's one thing that really seems to be lagging and everything else is doing well, do consider popping into your family doc or finding a way into us and we can grab an x-ray and just make sure that's not hiding in the background.
And for years and years, I just wrote it off as tight hips and do some stretching and things like that. And by the time I finally like dug into it a little bit more, it's pretty far gone.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool, that's warm up. Moving into doing something to get stronger. Interestingly, most of the research was centered around doing half back squats. I'm not going to run through this one with you, but a half squat, right? Just heading down half range. And why does it work? Because in cycling, you're not creating power, a lot of power from right here. It's from kind of like 75% of the way down to all the way down, basically that 10-degree. So we want to be able to go down as far as at least 90 degrees down here in a perfect world. And in most of the research, they're using a Smith machine. I think that's just because they want to be careful about people's, maybe ability to hold the weight and not injure themselves. The Smith machine is something that has it's a barbell on your back, but you can rotate the bar and then the hooks grab, and you can set the weight down super easily. At any point, you could do it at the bottom range, you're just getting really tired, and just like hook it in, you can step back. So it's a safe way to start getting into things. I want to go over a couple of these. We're not going to cover all of them, but for me, I think bent over barbell row is something that is fairly, I guess, accurate and important when it comes to mountain biking. So with the bent over barbell row, we're bent over from the hip. We've got a little bit of a bend in that knee. So once again, we're kind of in that two-legged hip hinge position, slight bend in the knee, and then we're rowing with a barbell. I think that's in that. You're gonna use the model.
Yeah. You want to
One more.
No, just two hands on the.
Oh, yeah.
So I prefer the overhand grip if we're gonna be specific.
Yeah, you know that would break a flexopathy and a shitty shoulder for around negative.
So we can see that he's maintaining that neutral spine. That's part of this exercise. You're gonna feel lower back tension develop. And with that, it's similar to mountain biking. You might end up getting tired through your lower back, but this will gain you that resiliency to hold that isometric position. The second thing I like to think about with this exercise is that control of your shoulder blade, where you want to make sure that that shoulder blade is locked down and back prior to moving your arms. And I would say, as an argument point, that if it's your first time doing this exercise, I wouldn't be loading it up with even a 45-pound bar. That's a lot of load for people. We think about just getting that hip hinge position, slight bend through the knees, and maybe it's a broomstick, maybe it's some light dumbbells, but eventually we want to use a bar because that's the most similar to the mountain biking handlebar. And we can manipulate that. Another one behind you? No. Yeah, so come on up front and center. And let's face side so people get that side of the part again. So hip hinge, butt back, slight bend through the knees. Great. And the weight is naturally going to be hanging down if it's heavy. Neck is neutral. Shoulder blades are down and back. And we're pulling that bar up towards the chest. While you're getting out of this position, you should feel hamstrings and glute contraction. Should feel your back fatiguing a little bit, and it'll be a workout for your arm. But there's no premise to doing this unless you have foundation. Right? Why not two?
Like,
You could.
yeah.
I guess I'm suggesting that this is most similar to mountain biking. It's a. But we're going to be as specific as possible. Okay, let's go and do something a little bit different. Kickstand deadlift. I could have shown you guys just a simple add-on from that hip hinge. This is theoretically we'll call it Romanian deadlift. You put a bar and you just do that hip hinge, and you're strengthening hamstring, glutes, and back. Conventional deadlift, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to start to bend the knees, and with that, you can get a little bit lower, and you're going to definitely get some quad activation, but still heavily glute and hamstring. If we're going to be as specific as possible to biking, we might put one foot in back, and this now simulates our feet on pedals, or that might work for road biking. And we're going to end up going into that same position, but there's just a little bit of a support on the back leg, which actually allows me to weight shift my hip further back and load more through the glute and the hamstring, which, by the way, is a fairly underutilized tissue in the majority of people. So wants to do a volunteer, that's volunteer. So let's do a hip hinge, two-legged hip hinge, which we practiced. Good. And squeeze your bum back up. And let's do that again. And back up. Well, and can you show me a conventional deadlift? So back, start to your knees. And so I pause you at the bottom. I'm going to say torso angle is probably like 20, maybe 30 degrees above parallel. As a general rule, we say probably want to be around 30 to 45. So maybe just ever so slightly more instead of like horizontal to the ground or upper, just a little bit. Great. So when you hold that position, put your right foot behind the left toe just behind the heel. So in line with the heel up. Yeah, great. And so we have maybe 25% of her body weight on that back foot, 75% on the front foot, but on the heel of the front foot. And she should be feeling this coming along. I'm not sure if you are.
Yeah.
You don't have to say it, you know. Okay, and squeeze here and stand back up. And then go back down and find the position again. Okay, and then back up again. A little pinch. Okay, so when do you start to feel it? Yeah. Okay, so for you, at least until we know why, I would say stop before you feel the pinch. And we would end up putting either a barbell or dumbbells into her hands. All right, give it a go, guys. Let me know if you have questions. Have yourself a good. So the back foot toe is in line with the heel, not walking a tightrope, with the front foot in line with the heel. So this foot should be right here.
Oh, here.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. The toe should be on the ground, the heel is not, just double checking. So kind of feather weight bearing, as you might say, on the back foot. It's just a little bit of weight on that back foot. Heel is up off of the ground. You guys are tying back. Hold it together and try to feel the weight on the heel of the front of the foot should stay in contact with the ground. And you should feel, if you're pushing your bum back towards the wall as far as you can, that the load is in your hip. Yep, yeah, you got it. Front legs, hip.
I'll just put it out there. I don't do this, not that there's anything wrong with it. I think it is a more specific exercise, but it's because I'm lazy and I don't have somebody watching me to do good things. And so I tend to personally just do deadlifts. So if you found this was a struggle with a pinched hip, that would just be my thought. Would be like, if you find that as you shift your weight, it's bothering something, it would be better to do an exercise that wasn't hurting you than trying to get into one and foregoing it because it's bothering you. So.
Yeah, like anything is better than nothing, but in the pursuit of being specific to the goal, this is more specific than conventional.
Would you train both sides?
Yes.
Well, no, you haven't said that yet.
I did not. This is new to me, having my co-presenter help me with the topic at hand.
It's important because cycling is super one-sided, and so you'll see. I'm a sporting person into one-sided sports, downhill mountain biking-ish and snowboarding, and you tend to develop unilateral moving tendencies that can cause problems in weird ways that feel different on each side. And so, yeah, with this, if I was to do it one way, I would definitely then go into the next step on the next side. It tends to be that as you get cycling, everybody at the highest level of competition favors one foot forward if you are in the mountain biking world. And so that's just important to realize that a lot of people then go and only train that side, but you should be training both sides, just so you don't end up with, you know, crazy big glutes on one side and have a, you know, by weird shaped hands. So.
Great, let's do One more exercise, let's do a side plank variation. All right, so one last volunteer. All right, pop your jacket off. So we're gonna do a side plank. And when it comes to side plank, it's more or less like a standing neutral position from the elbow. We're gonna do this on the ground with feet stacked to start. So here we go. Good. And so the first question I have for the person is, which muscle groups do you feel coming on?
Hopefully.
Okay.
Older.
Yeah, some shoulder fatigue. Good. Let's switch sides. And you comment that it feels similar on this side or different?
Yeah, similar, but feeling it in my chest a little more.
Okay. Great. So I just want to make sure that with someone that's doing this, they're not having shoulder pain. Someone that's had some shoulder pathology before, out to the side, it's going to be pretty tough for that. So that's kind of my first concern. Second concern is we have equal muscle activation. We feel it in the same places. Theoretically, side plank, pretty good for glute activation, pretty good for oblique activation. And why do I think that this is a good exercise specific to mountain biking? Because we need to be able to resist G-forces as we turn corners and we corner into things, pushing the body away. And it's not just a forward motion sport. That's also trained some of these other planes of motion. This is, I guess, level 2. We could have started from the knees. Even before that, we could have started with hand on a table and feet on the ground if you weren't certain how your shoulder and core were going to feel. And then beyond that, we could start to get into some other variations of side planks and call it side plank variation, and we could do things that look like this. We could do things that look like this or like this, and more or less it's all one level built upon the next, trying to find where you're at. There's a good starting point, and there's no best starting point than the starting point. I don't necessarily think we have to review on. I just wanted to show you guys. Questions about anything we covered so far related to movement? Does that make sense? One last as related to movement is rolling, falling off of your bike and rolling off of it, keeping momentum going and not falling and breaking a collarbone like I did last. So as related to somersaults, let's get maybe 5 people lined up and let's do a somersault in the middle and then we'll let you go. Who has practiced rolling perfectly? All right. There's up next. Don't make all of us presenters do it.
I was teaching my toddler yesterday. That's recently.
I'm just gonna land hard.
Cool. I like, all joking aside, it's probably actually a cool and a good skill practice. Who actually spends time on the floor rolling around and knowing how to keep the momentum going so that they don't get one direction impact. So that could be kind of a fun add-on to a program or a warm-up. So I just have the last 3 slides to go over, which is related to when would you do these things and for how long. I'm dividing it up into 3 different phases. One is preparing for training. So you're not yet accustomed to lifting weights. You haven't been lifting. And so we're thinking that we want you to start practicing those movements. We want you to start practicing them with light loads and high reps and gradually progressing it to slightly more moderate or heavier loads and less number of repetitions. Obviously, the more weight you use, the less number or more weight you use, you cannot perform as many repetitions. So we want you to gradually go along that continuum. As you lift more weight, you need more rest between sets. So start with about a minute. It's gonna feel like it's maybe in more of an endurance activity where you're focusing on form rather than focusing on lifting heavy things, and gradually you need more rest because you need to rest more in order to try to do that exercise again. Going forward to the next stage, I'm calling it base training, where you might be spending more of that time in higher volume amount of cycling, pre-mountain bike season, at least here in the Rockies, but maybe it's the beginning of getting outside on your mountain bike or on your road bike, or maybe this is kind of like March and you're still on the trainer inside. And once again, we're lifting weights approximately 2 or 3 times a week. And we're ideally in this phase for at least a month. And for this, we're trying to lift heavier. We're trying to reach closer to your maximum capacity, leaving 1 rep in the fuel tank, so to speak. You're not completely burning yourself out and taking yourself close to anything that could cause an injury if you did too much too soon, but you do want to build up into some fatigue. We're only doing approximately 5 repetitions per set. So it's not a lot of reps, 3 sets of 5, 4 sets of 5, somewhere in that realm, but you should be exerting yourself pretty heavily for those exercises. And then the last phase for me, at least when it comes to being on your bike during the season, is maintaining that base. Once you have that strength, the whole remainder of the season in general is about keeping as much as you can, aka losing the strength less quickly. You're trying to just keep it for your event or lose strength less quickly. And by that, you might start in that 80%, 85%, 1 repetition maximum is what that stands for. So if I could, let's say, deadlift 100 pounds, maybe I'm only going to do 80 pounds in terms of that load. So I might be doing something in the range of 2 sets of 8 reps, but these are general recommendations, and it totally depends on your event when you're preparing for that, how important that event is to you. Maybe you don't really care about this event. You can fatigue yourself so you don't lose the strength gains if you're serious about racing season. Last thing that I want to mention is as related to this second stage, you can see 3 to 4 sets per exercise. So in the list that I gave you, there were basically 3 lower body exercises, which fits well. We want about 10 sets of your lower body exercises per exercise session. So that mostly means you do 3 exercises in 3 sets of those exercises. Enough to fatigue you, enough to recover from that and get gains, but not so much that you're going to be too sore to go out and bike.